Well, happy noontime, everyone. And very glad that you're here. Let me turn off a few things and turn on a few other things. We're really glad to see you here for our third installment of Strengthen Through Standards. And this is a little mini series that we're doing as part of the Wednesday webinars, and kind of a little bit of a momentous change here. This will be possibly your very first PD hours on the new 21-22 PD tracking year. So you'll notice today, when you get your approval code, it will actually be a 21-22 approval code. So this will be hopefully the first thing that you count going forward. I do want to say something. I've gotten a couple of really good email questions just in the last week, and that is about these Wednesday webinars. Some of you, I know it's tough to make this time work. And so I may be talking to you guys in person who were able to make it work, but I may also be talking to people who are watching this in the archive after the fact. And so the question was this: if I miss, sorry, I'll turn the screen share off. If I miss a Wednesday webinar, especially one of these ones that's for PD credit, is this one of the things that I can go back and watch in the archive, kind of like what we've done at the virtual conferences, VOV and Fall Institute? And the answer is, for some of these, yes. We kind of started adding in the professional development hours a little bit later as the Wednesday webinars evolved into kind of more of a teaching format. And so the very first one, if you didn't go to it, episode 7, which happened back in December. It was the one on evaluations and surveys and how to get better data, especially pre and post data for impact surveys, things like that. Starting with that one, and then also the teach on Infinite Campus, which was Wednesday webinar 12. And let me just take you on a little trip here. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to reshare my screen. And let me just take you through what I'm talking about here. All right, so let's bring the hub on over here. And we'll make it so you can see it. Okay, so if you haven't been there before, and I'll go ahead and put this link in the chat, and you can go ahead and open it up. Hold on, I gotta change this to everyone. Okay, and so there is the website, Training Hub, the Training Hub website link. And so if you haven't already saved this and bookmarked it, please do, because here on our Training Hub is all kinds of information. So it's information about upcoming conferences, trainings that are coming up. But if you go over, let me move the share bar out of the way here. If you go over here, there's information. If you're one of those coordinators who's new in the last year, this is where you got your new coordinator orientation and returning coordinator orientation materials. That's all still there. It's just in this one section. If you ever want to go to any of the stuff that we have on the Google Classroom, which includes the initial version of the archives of Wednesday webinar, by all means, you can go to that, and that'll take you right to those classes and that information. But right here is the Wednesday webinar link. And if you click on that, it will take you to a page, and you can see a table of contents, and kind of in reverse order, there are all of the episodes that we have previously archived. So back to my conversation point, starting down here with episode 7 on effective evaluations, episode 12, Infinite Campus, and then this whole Strengthening Through Standards series. So there's 2 that have already happened. Those are both archived, and they're technically part of the 2020-2021 training year. So even if you were to finish one like today, technically that approval code is still tied into last year. So all 4 of those can be watched for PD credit. Those are all linked to last year. And then starting today, later this afternoon, you'll see episode 17 will be archived up there, and same deal, 1 hour of PD credit. And all 4 of those, well, including today's 5 that I just highlighted, are all good for 1 hour of PD credit. And then just real quickly, we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but when we do a live webinar, we conclude it with an exit slip. And that's kind of a way that we know that you were here, and that's how we can track if there was ever a question on your PD form. We can go back to our exit forms. For folks that watch the archive, if you ever want to go back and catch up on some of those, or anyone else listening, if you want to round out your series and watch all 5 episodes, that's 5 hours of PD available to you. Then what you'll notice, let me scroll down a little bit. You'll notice that down here, if you click on any of these, it's going to take you just down here on the page. And you notice that episode 16 and 15, and if I go back to episode 12, notice there's this self-reflection form link. Okay, I need to fix that one because it should be a link. But after you watch the archive version, I'm sorry, I'm being way too long-winded on this. This is not that hard a concept. I apologize. Once you watch an archive version, just fill this out in lieu of the exit slip. And it's actually really nice because it'll email you back, and you can actually print that out and put it with your other certificates to keep track of your PD. Okay, any questions on that? Let me quickly look at the chat. I have a question from Barbara Allen. Are the handouts from the first 2 sessions available? The very first 2 episodes, especially Mariana Romero's, where she had all those bingo sheets and all that stuff that she did, those are all linked. In fact, if you go down here to the very beginning of the Wednesday webinar journey, you notice that her particular talk has a whole lot. So here's the actual talk that we recorded, but then she shared some stuff about a 4-H club. There were a couple different bingos that she presented. So what we try to do is any of those resources we archive here on the archive page. Okay, and so that's where we link stuff up. Jenny Whalen has a question. Is it possible to use the hours for the 2021 school year? I need it for this year. And Jenny, I think what you mean is you've already got enough hours for last year and you'd like to carry those over. Unfortunately, no, they really should be, and it's kind of a little bit dicey this time of year. You really should use the approval code for the year that it's in. But we can talk. And here's the thing, there's going to be 3 more Wednesday webinars as part of this series that are all going to be in the new year, 2021-22. So that's 3 hours. We got VOV coming up. To get credit for the conference, it's going to be just like last year. You'll have to attend at least 6 sessions, which is 7.5 hours of PD right there. If you want to go to lots of sessions, if you go to at least 12, you can max out PD and you can get 15 of your 24 hours just from PD. So if you watch the rest of these webinars and you watch at least 12 episodes of Victory Over Violence, you've already got 18 hours towards your 24 for the whole year. And then you add that with summer in-service, and you very likely could have all of your PD hours before you see your first student in the next school year. All right, super. Let's see. Yeah, and so if you find yourself that close to your PD, those 2 previous episodes, or well, really those 4 previous episodes, that would be a great way to get that extra hour of PD. Okay, enough about that, because that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk today about strengthens your standards. And today what we're going to focus in on is the diversity section. And so it used to be called Embracing Diversity, which was a great title. But with the update in the standards, it is now called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI for short. And we see that acronym through a lot of trainings and through a lot of jargon in our world. So what I'm going to do, I am going to play very quickly, just a quick 3-minute video from Marianne and Melissa. If you're new, this will be new to you. If you've been here for a couple of the previous episodes, you get to see it again. But they're great, and they really give voice to why the standards matter and why they're so important for us. So without further ado, let me turn things over to our FRYSC leaders. And as soon as I figure out which tab I have that on, there we go.
Hello, FRYSC coordinators. Welcome to our Standards webinar series. I am Melissa Goins, Director of the Family Resource and Youth Services Center program.
And I am Mary Ann Jennings, Assistant Director of the Family Resource and Youth Services Center program.
So Mary Ann and I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk to you about why we felt that having standards, adopting standards, was an important accomplishment for our program. The development of standards is a significant accomplishment for our field of practice, putting us in the same league as healthcare, childcare, education, and other fields that have long had standards. It's important for all of us to spend our time and efforts doing what works, and our adopted standards of practice include proven strategies for family support. Our standards were adopted by our national organization, the National Family Support Network, in 2013 from a team of leaders in our field that came together and agreed that we need some consistent practices that work across our field. Family Resource and Youth Services Centers had our own representative, Mike Denny, at the table in the developmental phase, and Randall Campbell, a FRYSC coordinator in Western Kentucky, had a seat at the table for the recent update, which allowed us to have input and ensure that it relates back to the FRYSC mission and vision. Local flexibility is always going to be a strength of the FRYSC program. Having standards of practice for all FRYSCs will help ensure that while we may meet the needs of families and students differently, we will all be committed to quality.
One of the ways that we've discussed using the standards of quality is with your advisory council. Our advisory councils serve many roles. They're advocating, they're working with accountability, and they're guiding our program. The standards of quality support your advisory council in all of these areas. They give the advisory council language to share information about not only the work that you're doing, but that your center is performing at a high level. Discussing your programming in the terms of the standards of quality allows your council to hear about your work and to help determine areas of growth. And finally, the standards of quality help guide discussions about your school community, their needs, and how the center can meet them. So when we look at the next steps of our standards of quality, we're going to continue to work them into the fabric of their program. They're a part of what Family Resource and Youth Services Centers do. Quality standards are not intended to be a one-time event or a one-time discussion. They're ongoing with our Family Resource and Youth Services Centers. Our centers base our programming on core and optional components and that local need that Melissa talked about. That's what we do in our centers. And then our quality standards build on that. And we're focusing on how we accomplish our goals and at high levels.
So thank you for participating in this webinar. Just you being here shows your commitment to the growth of your center and your practices as a coordinator for the Family Resource and Youth Services Center program.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies. All right. So let me go ahead and turn my share off. All right, everybody. Looks like we've got almost 50 people. One thing I would like to say today, we're going to try to switch things up a little bit. I'd really love to see people on camera if that's possible. Again, I totally get a lot of different reasons why you can't be. Technology, you got kids, you're eating, all of those are great, and that's fine. So no pressure, but it will feel more like a class, and I think we'll be more involved and more engaged with each other if you can be on camera. So I'd very much encourage that, and get ready to type, because we're going to do a lot of chat box type activities throughout the course of today. In fact, you're probably going to have tired fingers. That is my hope. That is my goal. That would be my dream come true. What we're going to do, we'll start with a poll. So we're going to be starting today, again, on diversity, equity, inclusion. In your manuals, that was the old embracing diversity section. And so just like the previous two episodes, if you were here, we're going to start with a quick poll to do a pretest on how do you feel right now about using the DEI portion of the standards, the diversity portion of the standards in your center right now. And that could be talking about it, sharing with your advisory council, actually implementing it, really making this take hold in your center. So what's your comfort level right now? So let me go ahead and launch that poll. And so let's see, this is pretest. So there you go. And this is your first place to kind of warm up those fingers. And really just on a scale of 0 to 5, how do you feel about, we'll just call it the diversity section, and we'll talk more about the differences right now. So I've got 13% of you. This is a simple poll, just one little question. I know on some technology, it kind of pops up behind the windows and behind the shares. That's why I turned the share screen off for this. So hopefully you can see that. And since I see so many people on camera, that's great. Thank you so much. If just raise your hand if for whatever reason your technology doesn't allow you to do polls. I just kind of want to know percentage wise. Looks like everybody on camera can, so that's good. All right, we're up to 77%. I'll give it just another second here. And I'll tell you right now, I'll give you a little sneak peek. So we've got a neck and neck tie for 3 and 4. I have found some limited ways to apply this particular section of the standards to improve my center. And 4 being I'm excited to use the standards to modify parts of my program and make them more effective. And I've got 2 people who could step in and help me teach today, and that's great. That's the kind of the comfort level we're hoping everybody can get to. And I think there's at least 1 or 2 trainers here, so I would hope you have a 5 on this section of standards. All right, I'm going to wrap up the poll. That's 86%. That's great. All right, so that's a good start. Be ready on the poll on the tail end, and let me share the results. And so here's what we've got. We've got a pretty good bell curve there. With right in the middle, 3 is where we've got a slight majority. And then we've got some other people that split out. So that's kind of where we are. That's our baseline. Hopefully after today's webinar together and our participation in our activities, you'll feel more confident. That's what we're hoping for. So let me go ahead and stop that. And we'll put that away for right now. And let's get our PowerPoint for today up and running here. Okay, there we go. And just with a quick thumbs up, can you go ahead? Can everybody see the Strengthen Through Standards? All right, super. All right, so again, this is episode 17 of our Wednesday webinar series, and it's part 3, part C of Strengthen Through Standards. Michelle McDonald was supposed to do this with me today. She had a last minute family emergency that came up last night. And like a good FRYSC does, she answered the call and rose to the occasion. So unfortunately, we planned this together, but you're stuck with just me presenting. I apologize for that. But without further ado, so what are our objectives for this particular session? And these are the objectives for all of these. So as we pick apart the standards and focus on just one section at a time, we've got 2 main goals. Okay, the first goal, and I wish that this had been the name of the series. We thought of this yesterday, but this is the Kentucky Fried Standards. This is our version of the standards. And that's absolutely what this would have been called if we had thought of it prior. But the point being, what we want to do is we want to take the language of the standards and we want to break it down to how it makes sense to us. How does it make sense in Kentucky within our FRC or our YSC or our FRYSC? What does it mean here in the state? How can we use it? Let's just focus on what we want to get out of this. So that's objective number 1. And objective number 2 is actually specific to each section. So the diversity section is now diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, so what we want to come away from today is on the first word, diversity. In the chat box right now, if I say diversity, honestly, what's the very first facet of diversity that most people think of? What do you think of when I say diversity? Go ahead and throw it in the chat box right now. I see Jenny, race, culture, people of color. Absolutely. Ethnicity. And honestly, when we fill out federal forms, right, that's what diversity means. Like all the federal forms have to have you self-disclose your racial makeup, and then you usually disclose your ethnicity. And honestly, for federal forms, it's usually Hispanic or non-Hispanic. Like they don't really care about all the other diversities. Those are the 2 things that are captured all the time, okay? But we do have some other things here, and culture, absolutely. So what we wanna do is we wanna blow that notion as wide as is humanly possible. We want to be able to walk into a Black Baptist church where every single person is African American, every single person is Baptist, every single person lives in that neighborhood and goes to that church, and still see the amazing diversity that's in that room. And I think a lot of times we're blind to all the other levels. So we're going to talk about that in a second. We've got an activity specifically about that. The second piece is equity. So the reason that we really care about diversity is we want to be aware of barriers and biases so that we can make our centers just as welcoming as possible. So, I mean, our centers exist to eliminate barriers. So we want to make sure that we're responding to diversity and the barriers that it presents. And then finally, and then inclusion is the goal, right? If we do this well, then our centers are welcoming to everyone, regardless of where people are with different aspects of diversity. So that's kind of our objectives for today. And so, and there's where we were supposed to do the poll. So we've already done that, and we know where we stand right now. Okay, so I'm actually going to depart from this PowerPoint for a moment. And instead, we're going to go to our Prezi. Okay, so just like we did in the first session, let's just kind of talk real quickly about some overview stuff, just review, and I'll be as quick as I can because I know a lot of you, I see a lot of familiar faces, and I know that some of you were here for these previous sessions. So real quickly, when we talk about quality indicators, first of all, if you haven't already heard, there is no more minimum quality that we will ever talk about. That's the last time you're going to hear me say that word, okay? Instead, now what we have is we strive to reach this foundational quality, and that's great. If you get your entire program so that all of your different components and all of your activities are at foundational quality, you have got a top-notch center, you know, like 4 stars, okay? And then in the standards present us with a way to look at where you are right now and think, how could I make this even better? How could I make this, how could I strengthen this? Or maybe I've got something that I've been doing for a long time and it accomplishes this goal, but maybe there's something different that I could do. Maybe there's a new way I could do it. Maybe there's some tool that I've learned where I could do a meeting or an activity in a hybrid way so that people that didn't used to be able to come to my activity can still participate through all of what we've learned through this year with Zoom and virtual, and still do all the good stuff I did before, but also make it more accessible to people that I couldn't get to come before. So, and what we want you to do is use the standards to help you analyze things and find ways to find that improvement. So again, if you're at foundational quality, you're doing a great job. That is solid foundation, and it is compliant with your contract. And that's what we're all shooting for. And to get to anything higher than foundational quality, you got to go here first. You've got to get to that foundational quality. And I don't know why it's zooming so many times. So let's go back. And then to get to that high quality, we've added something else. It's that wonderful red velvet cake, and now we've got the perfect cream cheese frosting on it. We've made it a little bit better, and it can only happen once we've gotten to the foundational, and it's really just deeper involvement. It's just gotten better. And maybe it's the same program, but like I said, maybe we've included more people, or maybe we've found something to take it a little bit further or make it a little bit deeper, or whatever the case is, that's what we're striving for. Okay, so, and then very quickly, how we get there, let me skip down here to movement. So as we talk through today, this is the basic idea. So remember, when you pull open your standards manuals and you actually dig into the standards, there are 5 sections, right? We're talking about the 3rd section today, which is now diversity, equity, and inclusion. And within this, there are only 3 standards in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we analyze them through those arrow pages, through those, we call those indicator pairs. And actually, so here are some changes from the standards that you learned to the way that they're going to be updated. You heard Melissa mention in the video that Randall Campbell was at the table when they remade the standards. And so that's when the base level of quality became foundational, and through his work, they tweak the standards. And so the changes for the diversity section, other than the notion that we've changed the name and the scope, also diversity is going to be reflected through all the other 4 sections more than it was before. The other big change from your manual to what we're about to go through in detail is that the last standard actually got split in half into 2 indicator pairs because it's really 2 different things. So that said, let me just go into the elements here. When you look at one of those pages and you see the big arrows, this is just the definitions. Hold on, let me just zoom through this really quickly. Actually, let me back up. So the elements that we're going to talk about that pop up in this section are formal structure, staff training, and family partnership. So with respect to diversity, sorry, I'm having a thought for just a second. I want to change the order of something here. No, all right. I've got something else that I want to stick in, but we'll do it right after this. So in the chat box again, let's talk real quickly. When I say formal structure, think about diversity. And think about how diversity impacts your program. And you already have some familiarity because we've got lots of 2s, 3s, and 4s in the survey with this particular section of the standards. So when I say formal structure, what are some formal structures that would come into play with diversity? Kind of a trickier question. So think about that for just a second and be brave and go ahead and put something in the chat box. So what does formal structure in the context of diversity mean? And feel perfectly free to say, I don't know, but I'd love everybody to chat something in there. All right, so for Maggie, having a policy that all the materials and centers are available in various languages, great. A survey being translated, yep. Sharing parents' rights, excellent. Having committees where you have diversity represented. Anything else? Policies and procedures that encourage and promote diversity and cultural exploration. Okay, somebody pulled that out of the manual. That's a great answer. I'm not sure it's perfectly fine, and that's what we're here to talk about. Multicultural resources. Okay, keep chatting those. And so now I'm going to switch gears and let's talk quickly. Well, okay, so really anything that is an intentional strategy with committed resources qualifies as formal structure. Also, formal plan to complete center activities with the stuff you have, and it can be repeated over time. A great way to think about formal structure is think about what we're getting ready to do in the course of the next calendar year, and that is go through the CPP process. So in going through that process, that would be a great place to build in some formal structure to some of these things. I'm way behind in my chat. Let's see. And if you all should be able to read these, let's see, you got policies about population served, things written in all languages, advisory council membership, great. Beth just had an advisory council meeting today and they actually discussed this. So that's wonderful. That's timely. Let's see, Carmelita, committees, surveys translated, languages, parental involvement. Perfect. Okay. All right. So continuing on so that's formal structure. Staff training, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, although it may not be the staff that you necessarily think about. Okay. Staff training obviously could mean yourself and an assistant if you have one, but it could also be training for other faculty and staff in your school. It could be training for your advisory council. When you're principal, if you get a new principal that's not familiar with FRYSC, somebody that's maybe hired in from another state, one of the things they need to do is they need to take the principal module so they understand what FRYSC is and what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. So there's lots of different elements of training. It doesn't just mean, the stuff that you and I communicate about. All right, I'm sorry, I should have zoomed in. And then the last one, is family partnership. And so let's do the same thing, chat activity again. So how does family partnership look in the context of diversity? So again, chat your answers in there. I think we already crossed over some of those answers that you guys gave before were great, but they actually crossed over into a little bit of this partnering with families piece. So again, what would the element of family partnership look like in the context of diversity? So we've got parents giving leadership to programming. Great. Feedback and collaboration. So again, part of that standards training, that 360 feedback loop of having parents involved as many parts around the planning, the implementation, and the evaluation of programs. Parents leading programs, celebrating cultures, great. And what better way to celebrate diversity than to invite people to talk about their culture, their religion, their background, their experiences. Let's see, what did I miss? Parents developing ideas with us, feedback on programs, creating programs where families present cultures and diversity to educate others. And I apologize that I'm reading, if you're reading along in the chat and you're listening to me say it again, unfortunately the chat does not carry over into the archive. And so I'm being much more intentional about making sure that the folks that come after us and watch this out of that archive we just looked at can see some of these great answers. All right, well, that was wonderful. Okay, so, and that's what we're really going to focus on today. So we're going to look at the 3 standards, the now 6 pairs of indicators of how I can see where if my center or my program or my activity has gotten to that foundational level and what it would take to stretch it. And maybe I'm already at that high level of quality. And that's great. So let me click forward just a little bit here. Okay, and let me just click real quickly on this example. And so this is what we're going to, again, you've seen this in your manual. So for all of the standards, for each activity pair, there's a big arrow on that page, and it's here's what foundational quality looks like, and here's what high quality looks like. All right, so let me put a pause in the crazy presentation for just a moment. Hi again, everybody. So before we go any further, and this is one I'd really love to have everyone participate in. And you can participate multiple times. So if you have lots of great answers, type 1, hit enter, type another one, hit enter, type another one, hit enter. So let's talk about diversity. So let's talk about that example I talked about, where you walk into a situation where it looks like everybody is a lot alike and there's not a lot of diversity. And if you look deeper, there's a lot more than race, ethnicity, and culture to diversity. So I'm going to actually put a title in here. We'll call it Aspects of Diversity. So be thinking about all of the vast array of what diversity could really look like. So remember, one thing at a time. We'll see how many we can get here. There's 46 of you. So I'm ready to read. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so we got food, good one, socioeconomic class, income, grandparents raising kids, age, grandparents, race, family structure, religion, special needs, income again, family, poverty level, different holidays people celebrate, age, literacy, gender, marital status, education level. At this point, I'm just trying to pick out ones that are new. Keep coming up with new ones. Different community, values. Great one. Disabilities, customs, sexual orientation, clothing, morals, raised by, so we went through a big paradigm where we had all these kids that were being raised by grandparents, but what about kids being raised by other family members, maybe more distant, aunts and uncles, maybe an older sibling, hairstyles, that's a good one. Thanks for that, Carmelita. Anything else? Foster homes. And a lot of these aren't just little things, tribal markings. Some of these are foundational things that if we don't address that diversity and recognize where people are coming from, then we might miss the boat. So somebody, the kids that you work with that have parents going through divorces, where there's active abuse in the home. Discipline's a good one. What do you do with your free time? So different sports and hobbies and arts. The importance of education. So there's the level of education that families have achieved, but also the value that they place on education. Great. And then homelessness. So good, like what I was just saying. If you're working with families and they're borderline homeless, you know, as FRYSCs, and we look at removing barriers, you know, it's hard to even comprehend some of the barriers that some of those kiddos have. And I know you all are working with them. So seeing all that diversity, you don't just see when you quickly look at a room of people, is huge. And I've seen self-care. Some others that I've seen, travel. You know, the people who've traveled to lots of states or maybe even another country versus people who've never traveled to any of the counties, but the ones that touch their own county. And so as we go through this, what I would urge you to do is get away from the idea that diversity means race or culture or ethnicity. It means all these things. And so as we're talking about these things, be thinking about, okay, you know, how would this play to some of those other aspects of diversity? All right, so that was wonderful. So I'm going to follow up with a second activity that's very similar to that. And by the way, great job. But thumbs up, do y'all like being a little bit more involved than just sitting and listening? Okay, good. Because I would love to have everybody really involved. So I'll try. Second big question. What are the attributes we need? Oh, I can't type. To recognize, to value, to be sensitive to do everything that we can to be welcoming, to recognize the barriers that might exist. What are attributes that we need in order to address this? So right off the bat, thank you, Tiffany, empathy, open-mindedness, good listener, compassion, empathy, compassion, patience, love. These are great. Understanding, kindness, open-mindedness, education, sense of humor, all ways to recognize this vast diversity that we're working with and not see it as a barrier and break down any barriers that might exist. Barbara Allen, I like that, seeing the bigger picture, seeing the big picture, and thick skin, because sometimes, you know, we can have tricky relationships with some of this stuff. Calmness, clarity, being selfless. I don't know your first name, but J.E. Johnson, I like that. Just listen. Yep, just listen. And then some self-awareness. Everything from how I'm perceived to what biases I'm bringing to the table, to how maybe myself, might possibly be posing a barrier that I'm not even aware of. And so just being really open to that. All right, those are great. All right, so let's dive into the actual specific standards. And I'll try to point out some of the very slight and subtle differences that you'll notice in the new version of the standards. It's really just a slight reorganization and a slight rewording. Again, other than the fact that we're really kind of revamping the breadth, the scope of this section. So it's now diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to try to see this spread through the other 4 sections of standards. But within the actual standards themselves, the standards are relatively the same, and there's just been a little bit of a nuanced movement. So I'm going to get out of this one because this is really hard to back up on. And instead, we're going to start out with a brand new Prezi. And hopefully I won't get too tangled up in it. So let me go ahead and put my screen share back on. All right, so again, the standards themselves exist in the 5 different sections. We're going to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are a total of 17 standards total, 3 of which fall in our section. And the number of indicator pairs has actually changed. I think we've picked up 1 or 2. I think there's 28 or 29 indicator pairs now. And our section is actually responsible for 1 of them. And we now have 6 indicator pairs. So we're gonna look at each standard through 2 slightly different lenses. And so let's dive right into it. So embracing diversity, here we go. Okay, so we just talked about the many different aspects of diversity. And again, it's not just race, it's not just ethnicity. It's very, very much multi-layered. Excuse me. I should have brought a bottle of water today. Both staff and families need to develop skills to interact with people that are different from themselves. And I think we talked about that. And I think, honestly, that list that you all just generated, that's really what we want to promote. That's what we want to encourage with our colleagues, with the teachers, with the parents, with our advisory councils. We want everyone that touches our center to embrace this, like you all just did in that activity. And remember, this is always going to be an ongoing process. And so, like, I can look at my own life, and when I encountered for different things for the first time, and it took a while to kind of get used to and get comfortable with different things. And my whole life I've strived to do that. But as I encounter some new things, it's, I want, at the very least, I want to learn about it. I want to understand it. I want to be sensitive to the do's and don'ts. And this is a never-ending process for all of us. Okay, so let's get right into it. So standard ED1 really hasn't changed a whole lot. I'm actually going to pull up a different screen. So here's what you all have in your manuals. And I'm going to actually read you just to give you a little bit of a foil here. I'm going to read you the standards. I'm going to try to. Okay, so the new standard is your center respects values. I think this is exactly the same. Center respects values and embraces the diversity of families, including their cultural traditions, languages, values, socioeconomic status, family structure, sexual orientation, religion and spirituality, individual abilities, and other aspects. And I almost wish that other aspects was all in caps, because it's all those things that you listed in that first activity. And so on this, as we look at the indicator pairs, the big arrow on the page in the new manual is still going to be formal structure. And so as we look at the 2 levels of quality, foundational quality, we want to make sure that the center is demonstrating an awareness and reflects the diversity of families served. So the questions we can ask, and this is where we kind of friskify this, right? This is the Kentucky Fried Standards part. So what does that mean to us? Are we effectively communicating with the families we serve? Like, if all I do is, if I have a website and all my information's there, am I reaching the people that don't have internet, who don't use computers? If all of my stuff is going backpack express, and I'm sending lots of leaflets home, who might that be missing? If I've got a variety of languages spoken in my school, do we make sure, do we do a good enough job of making sure that things are going out to families in languages that they can read? How are we accommodating people with hearing differences? That's one of the things I've tried to get my mind around through the pandemic. Okay, so we can't do things in person, so we'll pivot and we'll move to Zoom. Well, how does that work if you're hearing disabled? And so unless you've got somebody who can sign and who can be on their screen while they're going through meetings and through different things. And then even look at our center. Does our center reflect the diversity in the building, or the diversity in the community? Maybe your particular school doesn't have some of the diversity. Here in Lexington is a great example. Our schools are very segregated, unfortunately, because they are neighborhood schools, and they just are. And so what does the building, what does the actual physical space look like? Okay, so that's what we want to be asking when we're looking at, are we demonstrating an awareness? Okay. And so I think we just talked about some more examples. Programs in different languages, an interpreter, a calendar of events that's going to look different from distributed materials and so on. Okay, and I'm reading way too much, so we're going to get you more involved here. Let me move forward. So let's look at the high quality. Okay, so through the elements of formal structure, we're going to demonstrate an awareness. So right again, chat box. What are some ways that we could address this particular indicator pair with formal structure? And so on the Prezi, I actually clicked one click too soon. So just to kind of maybe prime the pump here. Do we have families with different backgrounds that could be involved? So this actually came up before, where you invite people in that do represent diversities of whatever sort, and you invite them to share about their particular background. Multicultural posters. Utilize your advisory council members as helpers in the outreach, especially if your advisory council is doing a good job of representing the diversity that you have. Translators, and translators is both having a resource to translate text, but also having somebody who can actually interpret live for things like advisory council meetings. Having speakers come in, absolutely. Inviting parents to help plan activities. All of those things take an otherwise welcoming center, and they really raise the level of how we're addressing this awareness of the diversity that we have, and doing it with formal structure. Okay, great. Let's move on to the second indicator pair for the same. And actually, I went too quick there. And so your examples were great. Here's a couple others. Possibly an annual event celebrating diversity itself. And again, breaking it down, not just cultural, but all of the different diversities. Basic life skills, adulting 101, structured grandparent relative raising. And I love that it's grandparent relative raising relative to the meetings. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so now the other indicator pair. And so this almost sounds the same. So for 1.2, what foundational quality is going to look like is not just the awareness of, but that element of layers, the complexity of diversity. And so again, the questions to ask, do we schedule events to include the whole family? Because as you extend out to bigger families, you're probably going to hit more of that diversity. Things like age, you might get into some disability issues. You might get into some other things. Are we intentional at inviting multiple family members? So that's just one piece. And so that's kind of questions you can ask of where are we on this particular piece. And a good example of how to approach this through, hold on a second. No, this is the one downside of Prezi. Scheduling events, convenient times, multiple family units in the materials on the board, kind of a self-explanatory way to make people feel more included. Okay, and again, it's formal structure for that whole first standard that we're going to be using. So let's be mindful of things and let's build formal structures to get to that higher quality. All right. That is, let me get to standard 2 now. All right, here we go. And hold on just a second. All right, so standard 2. Again, hasn't changed a whole lot. So center enhances the abilities of families and staff to participate in a diverse society and to navigate the dynamics of difference. And what this did, and I don't really necessarily understand this, but what you'll notice if you have notes that are carefully laid out for the first indicator pair and the second indicator pair for this particular standard, they've swapped them, but that's about all that's really changed. So in these two different lenses to look at this particular standard, one is really focused on staff, our colleagues and the staff at the school, and then it could include your advisory council itself. The other is going to be more focused on the families themselves. So let's take a look at the first indicator pair. Again, the element is formal structure. That's going to take us that's going to take us between that foundational quality and the high. Okay, so what does foundational quality look like in this case? The center's offering opportunities for families to learn about diversity and to navigate the dynamics of difference. So what questions should we be asking? Well, do we encourage a really diverse range of activities? Do we help students and families understand different cultures in what we're doing program-wise? So let's get back to the chat box. In terms of reaching this standard, so what are some ways that our centers can effectively do this? So what are some opportunities to navigate diversity and help people actually navigate the dynamics? So the first standard really focused more on awareness and the awareness of that extra piece of all of that vast layers of diversity. Okay, so Jenny started it out, a cultural fair during anti-bullying month. Great idea. Cultural awareness nights. Okay, good. What else? What other opportunities could we bring up to help families actually navigate, to get beyond just the awareness, but actually to help people navigate diversity like we're proposing right now? Any other ideas? All are welcome, read in. I like that. Thank you, Carmelita. Oh, we already did that. And so here, know about community services in our areas to help families. Great. So here's some examples that we built into the Prezi. Cultural Diversity Month. That's great. And so maybe different activities all through the month, and maybe even culminating in a cultural awareness fair. Diverse foods. Oh, especially those of you that have the virtual cooking clubs, to really broaden that and represent different ethnicities of food. I hadn't thought of that one. That's really neat. Hosting a local artist, maybe. Using a career fair to highlight all types of jobs. And keep in mind, sometimes there's subtle ways to get some diversity in your school. You may bring a speaker in that may not be talking about diversity. It may be somebody that's going to talk about art, or going to talk about summer camps, they're going to talk about nature. But in choosing that speaker, you choose somebody that also represents some diversity to give some exposure. Yeah, always food. Food's always a good answer. Food always will win the hearts and minds. Okay, so let's look at the high quality for that same one. So how would we actually build formal structure? You guys already answered it. So a lot of the things that you're talking about, like a cultural awareness month or something along those lines, actually build in some of that formal structure. Billy, family library with culturally diverse books, cookbooks, and checkout to YSC. Think about that. I mean, that is definitely a great example of formal structure where you're actually, making sure that your collection in the library represents what you're trying to achieve. So I'm going to skip. Well, no, let's go to the questions real quickly. So are we asking parents to share family dynamics? How formal are we doing it? Is it just like a little casual, like, hey, could you maybe reach out? Or are we actually doing something more formal? Again, same thing. Are we formally reaching out to the linking generation? So grandparents, aunts and uncles, and maybe possibly relatives in nursing homes. And are there community issues? where we can play a role and be sensitive and be involved. And so other examples of the same one. There's another great one, grandparents reading to kids. And again, that's what I was just talking about, right? So library time is a perfect opportunity where you can have lots of different people come in, different ages, different ethnicities, different races, different accents even, so that kids are really exposed to that. All right, super. All right, so let's take a look at the second side of this standard. And so this is going to be the one that focuses on staff. And again, when you get your new manuals, when you get trained up, all they really did is they just switched 1 and 2. So they focused first on staff and then on families as I spill my coffee. Okay, so this one's going to focus on staff. So what does foundational quality look like? And I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit here because we're getting a little low on time. And I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but obviously we're going to have opportunities for staff. So questions to ask for that foundational quality. Do we share experiences? Do we seek to understand problems of other people? Just a simple question. And so when you get to a point where you can very definitively say yes to those, then you're at foundational quality. So coordinators, sharing your experiences and using what you can experience personally or have experienced personally to reach out and make connections. And understanding problems faced by families that don't live like us. So just being mindful of that. So that's kind of foundational. So how do we get through staff training? And that's obviously going to be the element. Up to higher quality. Well, we want professional development around this. And so what are some questions? Well, what do we do formal training wise that actually helps address this? How do we promote diversity? What do we do when we hear an interaction and it just kind of sets all the hairs on the back of your neck, right? Like, gosh, I wish they just got that. Like that was, and you don't see that a lot, hopefully. But what do you do when you do? Like, how do you address that situation? And thinking of ways that you can bring staff training to bear to hopefully eliminate those experiences. Okay, and because always we're the advocates, right? We're the voice. And so hopefully you're not leading the charge on some of the stuff yourself. But if you happen to be in a place where maybe some of these things aren't attended to or certain diversities aren't addressed the way you think you should, then you have kind of a little bit of a leadership opportunity there. All right, and so I don't want to skip the last one. We are getting really short on time. So let me go to the third. And what you're gonna see in the updated standards is, so here's the standard. The center engages in ongoing learning and adaptation of its practices to address diversity. And so this used to just be one element pair. And if you read the standard, there are really 2 parts to that. There's the engaging in the ongoing learning, and there's the adaptation of the practices. So one of the changes in this section is they split those apart. So we can look at those separately. But for right now, since your materials are all still the original, let's look really quickly. It's going to be formal structure that's going to move you from that minimum quality to that high quality. Okay, so again, I like these questions. So let's just do the questions. Do we ask families what their family structure is? Do we learn about accommodations required for different populations? Is our population the same as when we first started as a coordinator, or has it evolved? If our populations have evolved, have we evolved to match them? And so those are the questions on the foundational quality. And remember, our element here, the thing that would be in the arrow, is formal structure. So one last chat blast activity. What are some formal structure type things that we could build into our programs that would help us move to this higher quality? And higher quality is going to be that we're implementing formal systems and practices to learn about and adapt to the diversity of families. So what are some practical things that we could actually do? What are some formal structures that we could do? So we've got, again, going back to diversity on the advisory council. That is a great way to build in that diversity in a very formal way, and so that we have voices at the table when we're doing that loop. Diversity in student clubs is a good one, great, and encouraging that. Any other kind of formal structure ideas of how we could get this to the highest quality? Implement programming in segments ongoing. Great. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because we're out of time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch the second poll. Keep the chat boxes going. And I'm going to put the second poll up while we're getting some chat responses. Implementing program. Okay, we got that. Do we know what questions to ask and how to ask? And use the information to plan the activities, including questions about diversity, inclusion, and adaptation, and using the 360 planning model to review evaluations. Absolutely. Diversity in student leadership programs, especially if you're YSC, absolutely, those are great. So as we're wrapping up here, I've got 40%, 43%. If you could go ahead and fill out that poll, and let me go ahead and stop my share. Actually, no, I'm not going to stop my share because I'm going to put something different up. All right, and let's go back to here. And very quickly, any questions? All right, I've got 77 people responding, and it's been open for a minute. I'll give it just another second. Any questions in the chat box, or feel free to come off mute if you've got any questions about what we've talked about today. Let me end the polling and share the results. All right, so and so there we have it. So now we've got 49% of you that are at F4, with a couple more people that are all the way up at 5 in terms of sharing this. And if you haven't been trained on the standards yet, that means you're probably a new coordinator. And I apologize that we are still waiting on getting all the materials so we can get those classes up and running. But that'll be your very first PD on the next training year. Let me get to some, oops, sorry. Let me get to some last logistical details, and I'll let you all get out of here. So real quickly, here is your PD approval code for this training. Like I said, it is the new training year, so you'll notice that our training numbers have started over. So this episode is PD code 004-2122, and it is for 1 hour. Again, if you're watching this on the archive, don't forget to do the self-reflection form. For those of you that are with me, though, your exit slip is right here. And I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. All right, so those are the logistical details. And let me go ahead and put that code in as well. And so once again, it is there on the screen. It is, one more time, it is 004-2122. They're always 7-digit numbers. And so that is the code for this session, and that is the exit slip. Now, I understand that we ran just a minute, about 5 minutes over, and that may or may not be correct. My system clock has been doing some really weird things this week. But if anybody would like to stick around and talk about any of this or ask any questions, please feel free to do so. But before I stop talking, are there any last questions? How or when can we get an updated booklet? Great question. So that's actually the holdup. They have finalized the new standards. They had some technical issues with getting it all formatted and typesetting and all kinds of crazy stuff, and I think they went through 2 companies. As soon as the materials are ready, those of you that are new will be invited to the RCO, the last part of the RCO, which is training up on the standards. And then throughout the regions, everybody's going to be retrained on the standards. And so, because really everybody was due for an update anyway, and because of the changes in the language and the updates in the standards, we're going to be rolling those out. So in the course of the next, say, 6 months, you'll have standards training, you'll have the needs assessment training, and then a training that each of your RPMs are going to be doing on the actual CPP process. And those 3 pieces we're really hoping to lead into you actually writing and developing your new CPPs. So if you're participating in one of those early classes, or you've never been trained on standards, you'll get the standards mailed to you because we're going to be doing those virtual. As soon as we move back to in-person, you'll receive your standards books at the actual training. Now, when we get a formal version of it, we will probably put a copy on the Training Hub website as well. And so you'll at least be able to access and read through a PDF copy, but we will very much work to make sure that you have an actual paper copy in place prior to being trained on the standards. And C. Campbell, it would be great to have the book early fall to help with CPP. I totally agree. And so we'll try to make that available to you. And again, even if we don't have printed manuals into your hands at that time, we will definitely have a PDF version that you'll be able to read through. All right. Okay, so without further ado, thank you all for coming today. And I'm going to go ahead and put some music on. You're welcome to chill out and listen to that as maybe you wrap up your lunch. But thank you very much for coming. And don't forget to fill out that exit slip. I'm going to put that in the post one more time, in the chat one more time.